Okay, this one is just too wacky not to talk about. Failed gubernatorial candidate and election denier Kari Lake is in Hungary right now, hanging out with far-right leader and fascistic prime minister Viktor Orban and others. And she did just a wild interview while she was over there that I want to take a look at a couple moments from. And she's delivering or delivered, I'm not sure if it actually has happened yet, a keynote speech at CPAC Hungary. Okay, really bizarre. I guess she's now just an international right-wing election-denying celebrity. So before we dive into the first clip from this interview, to give you kind of a quick explanation as to why this is so disturbing, is this represents the unification that we've talked about of these anti-democratic far-right movements across the globe. It's not just the United States, it's international. And Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister, is a few steps ahead of the MAGA right wing on some of these fascistic actions that we are seeing them become increasingly interested in. You have him going after the freedom of the press, breaking down democratic institutions in an attempt to consolidate his party's own power, and a bunch of very concerning things that have, by the way, been widely condemned by the international community. And very similar anti-immigration rhetoric as MAGA, wildly anti-LGBTQ. He's targeted LGBTQ people in Hungary in a major way. Also something the international community has called out. He's constantly fear-mongering about the same globalist whatever that American right-wingers are. He says that he doesn't want a mixed-race country and proudly says he wants a liberal democracy, meaning a less democratic democracy. We've seen Trump in the past align with him. Now we have Kari Lake, who for some reason is just such a prominent right-winger, even though she just lost. That's her only story. She was in the news and then she lost. But here are them together in a post that Viktor Orban put on Twitter. But with all that being said, let's go through some moments from this interview that Kari Lake did while she was in Hungary for CPAC Hungary, starting with this.
The media is lying to us about President Trump. For 8 years they lied and they slandered him and tried to destroy that man, and in a way to get people to not vote for him. And when that still didn't work, they realized they had to unleash COVID in order to steal an election and to stop him, because he was going to stop this push toward globalism. So I believe the media is lying to us.
She's Josiah, did you hear Trump said the same conspiracy theory? And Steve Bannon did too. I've heard it a bit. China unleashed COVID on America to steal the election from Trump, to make it harder for him to win. What? Thoughts?
Thoughts. That's a good word, because that was that's a word that did not apply to those 20 seconds. That was just an incoherent mess. So first things first, we got to draw attention to Kari Lake's understanding of time, which I think is fascinating to consider how like MAGA Republicans contemplate time. She's like, they attacked President Trump for 8 years. What 8 years? When? The guy was in office for exactly 4. What are you talking about? Number one. Number two, when the COVID pandemic began, Trump was given intelligence towards the end of 2019 by his military advisors, by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by our various international intelligence apparatuses, that COVID was breaking out in China and it would make its way to the United States. He ignored it. He disregarded it. And then during the initial phase of the pandemic, he was praising China's government for how they were handling the pandemic. So I'm kind of confused. If China was setting him up, which, number one, why would they do that? But let's just accept the premise for the sake of argument. Why would he be simultaneously ignoring intelligence, forecasting it, and then number two, praising them for how they're handling it? It's just incoherent.
And the other thing, and by the way, we have more to look at from this interview in just a second, but the other thing that I said covering Trump floating this theory, or Steve Bannon did, and he kind of was like, yeah, definitely. The thing that I was saying is, we saw world leaders who handled COVID good, effectively, do great with the re-election bid, because crises often can actually make a leader more popular. And so the only way in which this theory, I was about to say makes sense, doesn't make sense, but let's say we go into Looney Tunes world, even within that world, the only way that it makes sense is if China is unleashing it, because they know, number one, they're going to kill people in their country and across the world just to get Trump's, okay. There's so many things to say. Oh, this is wild. When they actually benefit from a less stable United States, a less effectively governed United States. And that's what Trump was doing. So they probably were fine with him. But you would have to assume as China that Trump's going to mishandle it and it's going to hurt him, because otherwise you might worry you're going to help him because he'll become kind of this, a crisis leader who everyone rallies around, as we've seen in other times and as other world leaders experienced. So you're saying China knew that Trump was going to mishandle it so much, and that's why they unleashed it on America.
That's an excellent point. I mean, think about the people who are considered the greatest presidents in history: President Lincoln, President Washington, President Roosevelt. I mean, even modern presidents who are not considered quite so great, but like somebody like President Bush, he won re-election handily for the unity that came behind 9/11. Donald Trump could have politically, as cynically as it sounds, he could have just like sheer lizard brain calculus tried to manage COVID better, if nothing else, to increase his chances of re-election. He could have used the bully pulpit of the presidency to try to convince Republican governors and Republican leaders to take the virus more seriously, unite behind his own medical advisors, yada, 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 yada. He could have made a better faith effort. And as you said, may very well have been rewarded at the ballot box later that year if he'd done so, but he didn't.
And if he had done the whole, I've heard multiple people say this, but he prints out a bunch of Make America Great Again masks. He says, we're going to take this seriously. We're going to be patriotic about it. And we're going to set politics aside. You would have won over a bunch of liberals who hated you before, who are just, sweet and want to root for the leader. But no, instead he mishandled it. It was a disaster. And thus he lost re-election. Next moment we'll look at from this interview.
We need to show Americans that when we come together, we can climb out of the hole that Joe Biden has gotten us into, and other countries as well around the world. We need to have 190 plus strong countries in order to combat this globalism, and countries with unique cultures, unique people, and strong individuals. And I think that's going to happen if we follow the lead of Viktor Orban, of the Donald Trumps of the world. Well, I think Together We Are Strong is a message that I believe President Trump put out. That's the message I put out on my campaign. You know, the media wants us to be divided. The media, especially in America, but the globalist media, is really a mouthpiece for this globalist agenda, which is a disaster for the people. The people will be put last. This is not a good place for the people of this world to be in, this globalist agenda. And so we need to realize that the media has been lying to us on so many levels about COVID, about masks, about shots. The media is lying to us about President Trump. For 8 years,
and then it goes into the clip that we just watched. Josiah, I'll throw it to you.
I mean, I understand as a politics junkie that whether I like it or not, I've got to pay attention to Kari Lake. It's so tough. And clips like this are just an exquisite reminder why. Like in the first 10 seconds, she says, I'm an enemy of globalism. Globalism is dangerous. And to fight globalism, I need to form a global alliance of 190 countries to fight globalism. To fight globalism, one must be globalism. That's the most bizarre thing. And like, what?
Totally. And how that was lost on her, I don't know. But also, globalism to me, because there's an actual meaning to the term globalism typically. But what they mean when they say globalism is not what you just outlined. Trade is more open, economic interdependence is more present, all of that. That's kind of globalism in the traditional way. Their globalism is George Soros is controlling everybody, and all of that. And it kind of strikes me as similar to woke in the way they use that term. It's just kind of like, I stubbed my toe, globalism, Right. I got fired, globalism. It's just whatever they want it to mean.
The day is coming where globalism and woke, they're going to like, first it's going to be like hyphenate. It's going to be like woke globalism. And then it's going to be like wokealism or something. That's going to be like a portmanteau where it means whatever, it's whatever you want it to be. It doesn't just mean, that the idea that there, like you said, is commercial and diplomatic and even military interdependence where we can all rely on one another. And it's actually incredibly beneficial. Like globalism has yielded tremendous fruits, not just for other countries, developing countries, aspiring nations, but also the United States. We have all benefited on the whole net positively from globalism. But yeah, I think if you were to ask Kari Lake, what do you mean by globalism? I don't know what she would say.
She would say something about the World Economic Forum, probably.
You're right. Well, you're right. Actually, it is. It's an anti-Semitic dog whistle to her. So,
honestly, and that's what's annoying is sometimes there's these points that are made that could be a discussion that we have. You're not as much for globalism. You're saying that, and there she mentioned the different cultures. You don't want kind of a loss of independent cultures in different places, and you think that economy should be more independent or whatever. And we could go back and forth on why I think one thing, why you think the other thing. But it's always laced with, wrapped with, injected with some dog whistle of some kind, at least often it is. And so here, if you're against actual globalism, we could talk about that for sure. And there's tons of debates between economists and academics of all kinds, how much globalism is good, all that. But you just mean usually a conspiracy theory. And so then it's hard to engage with what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, and then the other thing is too, like, the thing is, like, you're right. There is a debate on some level among political scientists and economists about how much globalism, because it's a sliding scale, right? But like, even most people agree, like, their notions of competitive advantage, like, that's an easy one. No nation is an island unto itself. Even like vast resource rich nations like the United States, there's this notion of competitive advantage. We could probably, in theory, do everything ourselves, but it would be economically unsustainable. That's why we lean on other countries who have a competitive advantage in certain markets. Because if you just try to do everything yourself and have like a completely isolationist culture and economy, it's unsustainable. There's no way to maintain it. There's no developed and powerful nation on earth that does it. That should be your first clue.
Hey, before you go, Josiah here, good friend of mine, has had a YouTube channel, but now it's come alive. He's launching it 2.0. And thus, I want to use kind of the outro video today to say, go subscribe to his channel. Tell them why, Josiah.
So if you like progressive values married with pragmatic policy, and you like the Republican Party being called out for the threat they are, I'd appreciate it if you throw me a like and subscribe at youtube.com/ponderingpolitics, one word.